वाले हैं लर्निंग प्रिंसिपल्स। ये लर्निंग प्रिंसिपल्स क्या होते हैं, किस तरह के होते हैं, एंड वाई शुड ए टीचर नो दीज लर्निंग प्रिंसिपल्स, और एक टीचर को इन लर्निंग प्रिंसिपल से कैसे एक क्लासरूम टीचिंग सिचुएशन में हेल्प या मदद मिल सकती है। सो वी गोइंग टू लर्न हाउ चिल्ड्रन लर्न, द नेचर, फॉर्म्स एंड लॉस ऑफ लर्निंग। So before I start, let me introduce myself. I am M. Pavan Kumar, a senior research fellow from Regional Institute of Education, NCERT, Mysuru. Let's start. Today we are going to master learning principles. So before that, we need to understand a lot of things, and in this session we are going to cover all these major concepts. We are going to cover what learning is. We are going to understand the nature and characteristics of learners. That is the definition, characteristics, then the different forms that are there. That is conceptual, appreciative, perceptual, and associative. We are also going to look into 14 principles which forms a core framework of learning. The constructivist set of principles also, from nature of the learning process to standards and to assessment. We are also going to discuss the Thorndike's law. Thorndike's law talks about readiness, exercise, and effect. We're going to look into detail about it, and also the 5 subordinate laws and with classroom illustrations. So these are the major areas in which questions are asked with respect to the topic learning principles in CTET examination. So let us go ahead and start with a question. Which of the following order of presenting the concepts favors effective learning? Is it abstract to concrete, known to unknown, iconic to symbolic, or complex to simple? This is a question that we have already discussed, and if you pay attention to the question is asking which of the following order presenting the concept favors effective learning. The correct answer here is going from known to unknown. So going from known to unknown is the correct answer. Now why known to unknown works? Effective concept presentation always builds from what the child already knows, towards what is new. जब हम कनेक्शंस बना पाते हैं स्टूडेंट्स को जो ऑलरेडी पता है और वो आज क्लास में क्या सीखने वाले हैं, तो कॉन्सेप्ट्स बिकम मच मोर फेमिलियर टू लर्नर्स, एंड इट इज नेसेसरी फॉर अ टीचर टू मेक कॉन्सेप्ट्स फेमिलियर. जब बच्चों को लगने लगता है कि जो कॉन्सेप्ट्स वो पढ़ रहे हैं वो फेमिलियर नहीं है, which is something very new, very abstract or very different, their attention might decrease. Their interest in the concept might decrease. So it is always necessary to effectively connect what they already know to what they are going to know. That is also known as the unknown. So this is a core teaching principle, and it has been effectively echoed in the National Curriculum Framework 2005 and also in the constructivist view of learning. Constructivist view of learning means where learners construct their own knowledge. Coming to connect to daily life topic, learning should not only be going from knowing to unknown, right? While we are doing this known to unknown, we are also connecting the concepts to the daily life experiences. The single question prevails, almost everything will cover. Learning is most effective when new knowledge is linked meaningfully to learners' existing knowledge. Learning is effective when whatever they are learning is linked to what they already know. So construction of knowledge is something that we'll understand. We'll look into it shortly. Now, what exactly is learning? What is the definition of learning? Learning is acquiring new or modifying and reinforcing existing knowledge. Learning is acquiring some new information, learning something new, knowing something new, or modifying something that they already know. स्टूडेंट्स को पता होता होगा कि घोड़ा जो, और फिर एक पपी का एग्जांपल ले लेते हैं, फिर एक डॉग का एग्जांपल ले लेते हैं कि ठीक है एक डॉग है और ये इस जाति का डॉग है और इस ब्रीड का डॉग है. नाउ स्टूडेंट सीज दैट देयर इज वन मोर डॉग दैट लुक्स डिफरेंट बट इज आल्सो अ डॉग. Now the learner is modifying the information and situating new information, saying that okay, there are different types of dogs, and reinforcing existing knowledge. Reinforcing existing knowledge maybe by doing experiments, by knowing things. So learning is acquiring new, modifying or reinforcing existing knowledge, right? It's only not reinforcing existing knowledge, it's also reinforcing behaviors, skills and value preferences. So when we look at the definition of learning, it's acquiring new or modifying and reinforcing existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences. This is learning. So it produces a relatively permanent change in the organism. Learning produces a permanent change. When you learn about something, you'll not do the same mistake again. For example, once you know that a cooker that is just taken out of the stove is hot, and when you have experienced it by accidentally touching it, you'll never do the mistake again, because it brings a permanent change in the organism. Now you know that things that are hot can hurt you. So it is not compulsory, but it is contextual. Learning is not compulsory, but it is based on the context, right? And it builds upon what we already know. Then coming to the characteristics of learning. All children are naturally motivated to learn and capable of learning. Please remember this. Children, since they are born, they are already naturally motivated. I was taking the example, मैं छोटे बच्चों का एग्जाम्पल ले रहा था और आपको बता रहा था कि छोटे बच्चे हमेशा पूछते रहते हैं ये क्या है, वो क्यों है, ऐसा क्यों है, वैसा क्यों है. That shows that they are naturally motivated to learn. They want to know everything that is there. They want to touch and feel everything that is there. And they are also capable of learning. When you teach something, when you teach a new skill to them, they are capable of learning. प्लेट कैसे उठाना है, हाथ से खाना कैसे खाना है, right? Children are capable of learning. They learn through experience. Most of the learning that happens in individuals happens through experience. But experience is not the only way through which learning happens. Learning also happens by doing something, practicing something regularly, doing something, or experimentation. We all have scientists in us. We all experiment. In childhood, before bathing, we all used to experiment various items, dipping them into the water, right? We used to look at how can we see inside the bucket by dipping our head into the bucket. So we are natural explorers and experimenters. We read, discuss, ask, listen, and reflect. And this does not only happen in school, it happens within school and outside of school also. Learning happens within school, outside of school, at home, and at every places. If I just bring the concept of different sources through which we can learn things, or the different sources to which we can get information, then here the concept of formal, informal, and non-formal comes. Formal, informal, and non-formal. Formal means the information that we get from a formal setting, the knowledge that we acquire from a formal setting. Example, a school. When we come to informal, informal means knowledge that we get from a non-formal settings. Sorry, informal setting, right? That means anywhere, any source. For example, a child is reading a billboard that is put on a highway. The child is able to understand something new. That is learning. Or a student is watching someone perform a particular task. Maybe agricultural land, they are tilling the land. That is something, a new information. It's not in a formal setup, informal. Or they are just overhearing two people discussing about a particular concept or a topic or anything. So informal knowledge can be acquired through various sources. It can also be acquired through watching television, right? Either listening about a particular thing in television or by watching advertisements, by reading newspapers. There are a lot of sources. So informal means outside formal setup. And non-formal means the non-formal setups. It can be tuitions, it can be online courses, distance courses. So this is informal, formal, and non-formal. So information or knowledge can be acquired through different sources. That is why knowledge is acquired both within school and outside of it. The main important purpose that we need to understand and what CTET is trying to ask us is learning must be paced to allow depth, but yet stay interesting and challenging. The learning should be designed in such a way that it is paced to allow a child to go deep into the subject, into the content, but also make it interesting and challenging while doing so. Then, what assessment should track here? It's a very important aspect to understand what assessment should do in this situation. What is the role of assessment in this situation? A complete picture of child's learning means assessing the ability to acquire skills, monitor one's own progress, and respond to varied solutions. Applying learning across contexts, work both independently and collaboratively, analyze, evaluate, and retain learning over time. So we have discussed so many words in assessment, and nowhere you have seen the term test or examination. If you look at assessment, a complete picture of child's learning, a complete picture, what our NEP 2020 talks about, हमारी राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा नीति जिसके बारे में कहती है 360 degree development, 360 degree assessment. So, learning means assessing ability to acquire skills. How quickly a child acquires skills, or what is the pace of a learner to acquire new skills. Monitor one's own progress. Is a child able to monitor one's own progress? Is a child able to reflect? Are we making the children reflective practitioners? Respond to varied situation. How does a child or a student respond to a novel situation, a new situation that they encounter? Are they able to use their previous knowledge to apply in this new situation and solve the problem that is there at hand? Then, apply learning across contexts. What they have learned in history, connecting it to mathematics. For example, concept of Rangoli can be connected to tessellations, triangles, and other concepts. Our art integrated learning is already talking about it. Then, the student should be able to work both independently, work on their own, and also work collaboratively, that is, should be able to work in groups. Collaborative learning, able to work in groups, is very important skill that needs to be developed at school level, because if a student is comfortable in working with groups, understands the group dynamics, and also understands their role and responsibility when a group work is given, they will also be able to effectively contribute in society when group-based tasks are necessary and required. Also, they should be able to analyze situations, analyze things, analyze problems, evaluate one's own learning and even others' point of views. Also, retain learning over a period of time. This learning should not just fall off. Retaining learning over a period of time does not happen when rote memorization is done. You have just memorized content or information for writing it down in the examination. It is not learned, understood. So it will not retain over a period of time. Moving ahead, and let us look into the 4 forms of learning. Learning can take place in 4 forms. First one is conceptual learning. By the term itself, you can understand that it is learning about subject, learning about concepts. So learning about a subject in details. Learning about a subject, its principles and ideas. Learning about subject, principles and ideas until when? Until the student begins to think in abstract terms. Until the student is able to organize information into logical structure. And also, this gives the learner an analytical character. So when it comes to conceptual learning, it should not be limited to memorizing definitions, memorizing theorems. No. It is about making student to think in abstract terms. It is about making them organize information into a logical structure. This is what conceptual learning should be aiming at, not at just memorizing information. Then, appreciative learning, that is, ideas, attitudes, and mental dispositions tied to positive feeling. The students' ideas, students' attitude, and their mental dispositions are also tied to their feelings. Appreciating their ideas, valuing their attitudes, and making them challenge their dispositions will help them develop positive feelings. And also, when a child is appreciated for a behavior, a positive feeling arises. When a child is appreciated for a positive behavior, for a behavior that is most desired, then a positive feeling arises and the child tends to repeat this behavior to feel it again. We all do things to feel excited, feel energetic. So the same thing goes for learners also. Then comes perceptual learning. Also an important one, learning through senses. We just do not learn by reading, right? We just do not learn by looking at things. We also learn by hearing, listening. We also learn by smelling. We also learn by touching. Yes? Very easily, without even looking at items, if we touch it, we know what it is. With smell, we know which dish are we smelling, right? Also, while looking at things we learn. So the sense organs and brain perceive and record things. And it not only perceives and records things, it perceives and records events, incidents, and experiences directly. So learning also happens through our sense organs. Then associative learning. What is associative learning? A child frames a new memory about an object, entity, or event by linking it to already existing memory in mind. So associating what you're learning new with a pre-existing memory that is there in your brain. That is associative learning. So when you are able to learn something new and you know something similar to what you're learning, then you'll associate with it. But if you don't know anything such as, you have not learned anything before similar to that, then you'll create a new memory. Let us go to a question now. Which of the following statement cannot be considered as a feature of process of learning? Is it option A? Educational institutions are the only place where learning takes place. Option B, learning is a comprehensive process. Option C, learning is goal-oriented. Or option D, unlearning is also a learning process. Please read the options carefully and select the one which you feel is most appropriate. Now let me go back to the question. The question is asking which of the following cannot be considered. Please look at this. CTET examination purposefully does this. They will hide such terms. Not, cannot be, should not be, are not. And what we do is we try to read the question very quickly and we miss the meaningful terms. So the question is asking which of the following statements cannot be considered as a feature of the process of learning. Is it option A, educational institutions are the only place where learning takes place? No. So option A cannot be considered as a feature of the process of learning. So option A is correct. Learning is not confined to classroom. We all know that learning takes place both inside the school, within school, and also outside the school. It is enriched when these two arenas interact. What they have seen outside the school, then connecting it to what they're learning in the classroom enriches their overall understanding about that particular phenomenon. So treating school as a sole site of learning contradicts the characteristics we just covered. So please do not mark the answer that school is the only site where learning takes place. Then if I'm giving you an exam tip, please carefully watch for the terms only, always, never in the options. Not only in the option text, but also in the question text. Also in the questions. Because these are called distractors and they are specifically placed to confuse you. They want to see how carefully are you reading. So these absolute qualifiers are frequently incorrect options in CTET pedagogy items. The terms only, always, never, you have to be very careful when we see them not only in options but only in the question. So when they are given in option, they qualify for incorrect options, frequently qualify for options that are incorrect in CTET. Now let us come to learning principles. There are a total of 14 learning principles which discusses about how learning happens. Okay, the first one is nature of the process. Learning happens. Complex learning is most effective in an intentional process of constructing meaning. So when complex learning happens, it's most effective as an intentional process of constructing meaning. And the goal is successful learners who are active, who are goal-directed, and are self-regulating. Then when we come to goals of learning, successful learning build meaningful, coherent knowledge over time. Successful learning will build a meaningful knowledge, a coherent knowledge over time which they can, whenever required, utilize it, recall it, and apply it in a required situation. So refining gaps and inconsistencies as short-term goals mature into long-term understanding. So it's very much necessary to identify the learning gaps that are there and refining these gaps right? This short-term measures will help the child in long-term understanding. Then construction of knowledge. How construction of knowledge happens? New information links to the existing knowledge in meaningful ways. When new information is meaningfully linked, or connections are made meaningfully to what they know, to what they are knowing, then the retaining of this new information becomes much more effective. Concept mapping and thematic organization helps integrate new to and prior knowledge. You all have heard about concept mapping, you all have heard about mind mapping, right? There are different types of concept map. So concept map and thematic organization also help integrate new and prior knowledge. Then strategic thinking. Successful learning built a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies for complex goals. So what is here? In learning, reasoning, problem solving and concept formation, should be strategic thinking. Strategic thinking should be promoted, right? Strategic thinking should be built, and successful learners are built a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies for complex goals. So these thinking strategies, reasoning strategies are something that has to be encouraged, and students should be taught how to reason appropriately. What are the different strategies of thinking and reasoning that can benefit them in acquiring knowledge, and effective learning can happen. Then thinking about thinking. You all might have heard the term metacognition. Metacognition is nothing but thinking about your thinking. What you already know, reflecting back on it. Learners reflect on how they think and learn. This is very important. When you have learned something, you are thinking about what I have learned, how I can use it, what is the purpose of what I have learned. Set reasonable goals, choose strategies and monitor their own progress. Then context of learning. Learning, it's very important for us to understand how the context of learning is shaped. Learning is shaped by culture. Learning is shaped by technology and instructional practice. We all, to a very high extent, now agree that technology is playing a very big role in how learners are learning. When a student, the present generation student, comes to a class, they come with lot of information. We can never characterize the information into useless information. This all is important information, but then what is necessary and what is not necessary, there is a clear distinction has to be made there. Teachers can play an interactive role between both learner and the environment. Coming to other principles, motivation and emotion. Curiosity enhances motivation, and if the lessons, the learning is made curious enough, it builds in motivation among learners. Intense negative emotions like anxiety or fear of ridicule interfere with learning. When students are afraid of responding in class, thinking that when their answer is given, when they give an answer, others will make fun of them. Or if they ask a doubt, others will say, "Arey, kyun doubt pooch raha hai?" So this environment, this practice is something that has to be stopped in the class. It should not be encouraged in the class, right? With proper curiosity, motivation can be aroused and motivation can also be sustained in a classroom. Then intrinsic motivation. This is very important, and learners should be taught how to motivate themselves. Intrinsic motivation is the motivation that comes from within. So intrinsic motivation helps creativity, higher order thinking, and also produces natural curiosity. So this all drive learners one's own motivation to learn. Then development and diversity. What development and diversity talks about? Learning is influenced by individual development. Learning is influenced by individual developmental differences, which varies with maturity and is shaped by an individual's unique developmental path. Every individual develops uniquely. It's not like if there are 30 students in a class, 30 students will develop at the same pace. सबका हाइट इक्वल होगा, सबका वेट इक्वल होगा, सबका जो है इंटेलिजेंस, मल्टीपल इंटेलिजेंस जो है कुछ भी हो इक्वल होगा. No, that does not happen. As we've studied in previous sessions, that culture plays a role, right? Society plays a role in the construction of knowledge. So where the child comes from, the diversity also has an influence on the construction of their knowledge and also how they participate in the learning process. So we should also understand that development and diversity have a role in the learning. Then social interaction. social interaction, respect for diversity, and flexible thinking support cognitive and social and moral development. When social interaction occurs in class, in which respect for diversity is encouraged, the learning is flexible, and thinking supports cognitive, social, and moral development. Then also the self-esteem. This is how social interaction should be framed, or learning should encourage. Then coming to individual differences. If there are 30 learners in the class, all 30 are different. Not even 2 children are similar. So learners differ in varied ways. Learners might differ in the strategies that they use, or their approach when they approach a particular problem, their capability shaped by prior experience and heredity. So learners differ individually. There are a lot of differences among learners, right? They differ in how they approach a problem, and their capabilities are shaped by the prior experiences that they have had, and also the heredity. What they have acquired from their parents also plays a major role in learning. Then learning and diversity. Learning is most effective when linguistic, cultural, and social differences are valued. Remember, learning is most effective. So if imagine a CTET question comes, learning is most effective in which situation? When learning is linguistic, social, when learning is linguistic, cultural, and so when learning is where linguistic, cultural, and social differences are valued, or some other options will be given. So please remember, learning is most effective when the linguistic, cultural, and social differences are valued, respected, and accommodated. Then standards and assessment. High standard of assessment, not just conducting rote tests. The assessment should be challenging, standard, and continuous assessment of progress. What does this continuous assessment does? Continuous assessment provide vital feedback to both learner and the teacher. So let us go to an assertion and reasoning question. Assertion A. Teachers should not associate learning with strict discipline because children do not learn effectively in an environment of fear and stress. तो assertion ये कहता है कि teacher should not associate learning with strict discipline. टीचर को कभी भी स्ट्रिक्ट डिसिप्लिन को लर्निंग के साथ एसोसिएट नहीं करना चाहिए, क्योंकि चिल्ड्रन डू नॉट लर्न इफेक्टिवली इन एन एनवायरनमेंट ऑफ फियर एंड स्ट्रेस. जब एक एनवायरनमेंट ऑफ स्ट्रेस, एक एनवायरनमेंट ऑफ भय, डर बन जाता है क्लास में, तो बच्चे इफेक्टिवली सीख नहीं पाते हैं. This is the assertion given, and the reason that is given for it, this is early childhood is a sensitive period of development of language. Okay, so now let us go to the options. Option A, both assertion and reasoning are true, and reason is the correct explanation of assertion. Option B, both assertion and reasoning are false. Option C, both assertion and reasoning are true, but reason is not correct explanation of assertion. Option D, assertion is true, but reason is false. Which one according to you is the correct answer here? So the correct answer here is that both assertion and reasoning are true, but the reasoning is not the correct explanation for assertion. Okay? Both statements stand on their own. When you will see at both the statements, teachers should not associate learning with strict discipline because children do not learn effectively in an environment of fear and stress, which is true. And also, early childhood is a sensitive period for development of language, which is also true. But then, this assertion cannot be the meaning of early childhood as a sensitive period of development and language. So, the correct answer here is option C. So, when we see both are not connected, the sensitive period of language has nothing to do with strict classroom discipline that hinders learning. So, the link about emotional influences on learning, not language acquisition. So, the reasoning does not effectively explain the assertion. Now, let us come to Thorndike's laws of learning. This is very important and we need to understand, and questions can be asked based on these laws in the CTET examination. First one is law of readiness. What does law of readiness talk about? Learning takes place when an action tendency is aroused through preparatory judgment or attitude. So what Thorndike is talking about is learning takes place when an action tendency is aroused through preparatory adjustment or attitude. If one is not prepared to learn, learning cannot be automatically instilled. So learning can only happen when action tendencies arouse in the child. Learning तभी take place करता है जब बच्चों को arouse किया जाता है, interested बनाया जाता है learning process के तहत, learning process के लिए, right? And for preparatory adjustment or attitude, if their attitude is not brought into the learning process, then learning cannot happen. So this is what law of readiness talks about. In simple terms, if we'll try to understand what is law of readiness, a learner has to be ready or has to be made ready for the learning process at the beginning of the class. If the learner is not made ready, the learner will not participate throughout the class in the teaching learning process. Then comes law of exercise. Law of exercise states that drill and practice increase efficiency and durability of learning. When students drill, that means they practice what they are learning, apply to new situation, try to solve new problems that are based on the information that they have learned, or the topics they have learned, the content they have learned, or the skills they have acquired. That increases efficiency and durability of what they have learned. They have learned a new skill of doing something, and now they are practicing that skill in different situations. Then it will help them learn that particular thing or the particular task effectively and also durably. We can take examples of lab activities where students are taught how to do section cutting. Now, section cutting a child cannot master at first. They have to practice. They have to practice not only with one type of plant or one type of a section of a plant or an animal, right? They have to do, or a tissue. They have to do on different types. Only then will they become efficient and durable in the process. Connection strengthen practice. Connection strengthen with practice and weaken when practice stops. What Thorndike's law of exercise states is that these connections are nothing but the connections that are made in brain. The connection strengthen when strengthens with practice. When a lot of practice is done, this connection strengthens. And weaken when practice stops. For example, learning to type or play music. When you are regularly at a task, slowly you become efficient, slowly you become durable in doing that particular task. But as soon as the practice goes off, then it will be difficult. We can take the classic example of cricket and cricketers. We say cricketers go out of form, or even we adults, right? When we say that, okay, it has been a while for me, I may not be able to gauge the ball so perfectly while playing. So when you are connected with the process, then your skill becomes strong. So this is what is law of exercise all about. Then law of effect. What does law of effect talk about? A response that brings satisfaction. A response that brings satisfaction is learned and retained. Please remember this. This is also leading towards a reinforcement. Not completely, but you can understand that a response that brings satisfaction is learned and retained. You'll always remember something after which you were praised, right? After which you were satisfied. You did a task, you completed a task, and that gave you immense satisfaction. Let it be reading a book. Let it be performing a particular task or creating something that you have been working on since days. Then it is learned and retained. That particular activity is learned and retained. One that brings dissatisfaction or pain is weakened. Okay, one that brings dissatisfaction or pain is weakened. Greater satisfaction means stronger motivation to learn. So this is law of effect that Thorndike has talked about. Then when we look into the 5 subordinate laws, often tested by names in the CTET examination. These laws are often tested by names in the CTET examination. The first one is multiple response. What is this multiple response? The learner varies its response until an appropriate behavior is hit upon. The learner varies its response until an appropriate behavior is hit upon. It is essential to trial and error problem solving. The learner keeps changing the response, keeps trying something new until the problem is solved. Then comes set or attitude. Learning is guided by the organism's total set of attitude by the organism's total set of attitude, determining what will satisfy or annoy it. So based on the total set of attitude of an individual, learning is guided. If you are having a strong attitude towards something, then you will do it effectively. But then when you're not interested in something, you will not be able to do it, and doing the task will annoy you. When you like doing a particular task, then you'll enjoy doing it and it will also give you satisfaction. But when some other task is given to you, which you do not like, then you'll not do it and it will also annoy you, and the same thing happens for learners also. Then, prepotency of elements. What is this prepotency of elements? The learner reacts selectively to essential elements and ignores irrelevant ones. Okay, learner reacts selectively to essential elements and ignores irrelevant ones, enabling analytical, insightful learning. So when learning is happening, or when a particular skill is learned, they understand what is more necessary and what is not much necessary. So when the child is able to make the differences and understand that when they are learning a particular skill, when they are learning a particular concept, what are the essential elements that are necessary? And what are the elements that can be ignored or irrelevant? When this is achieved, it can enable analytical, insightful learning. Then response by analogy. When the learner draws an old experience while learning a new situation, using common elements from similar past case. This is similar to recalling. Responds to a particular situation using what they've already learned, right? Then associative shifting. Associative shifting talks about a response the learner is capable of becoming associated with new stimulus. So this was illustrated by Thorndike's cat. What he did, the cat was trained to stand up on command after repeated pairing with fish and reward. So let us go to a question now. Which of the following is an example of law of effect in action? If you look at the law of effect here, law of effect is response that brings satisfaction is learnt and retained, and the one that brings dissatisfaction or pain is weakened. Now let us look at the question. Yes, which of the following is an example of the law of effect in action? Is it option A, when the practice of learning is discontinued? Option B, learning to drive a motor car? Option C, when the practice of learning leading to pain strengthens the learning? Or option D, when the practice of learning leading to pain weakens the learning? The question is asking about the law of effect. Which of the following is an example of law of effect in action? When practice of learning is discontinued, learning to drive a motor car, when the practice of learning leading to pain strengthens the learning, or when the practice of learning leading to pain weakens the learning. If you look at it, the correct answer is it weakens the learning. Option D is the correct answer. Because when we'll go to the effect, right? Go to the second part, one that brings dissatisfaction or pain. I have marked here, weakens the learning. So the correct answer here is it weakens. When practice of learning leads to pain, it weakens. It does not strengthen. This is wrong. Please don't get confused. So satisfaction strengthens, pain weakens. That is what law of effect talks about. The satisfaction strengthens learning and pains weakens learning. Law of effect says that satisfying outcome strengthens a connection and dissatisfaction or pain weakens it. So don't confuse with law of effect. Option A and B describe practice and its discontinuation. Option A and B talks about practice and its discontinuation, whereas the law of exercise, that is the law of exercise, not the law of effect. So CTET frequently tests this exact distinction. So let us come and summarize or take a quick glance at what Thorndike has talked about. Law of readiness says that learning needs preparatory mental and physical adjustment, that they need to be ready mentally and physically to learn. And classroom example is settling and motivating students before introducing a new topic. Law of exercise states that practice strengthens, disuse weakens connections. When we practice something, then it strengthens, and when we do not practice, it weakens the connection. So repeating drill in handwriting tables or recitation. Then law of effect. Satisfaction strengthens, pain or dissatisfaction weakens. Praising correct response to reinforce the behavior is an example that can be taken here. So if we'll go to quick recalling of what we have discussed in the session, who proposed the inside theory of learning? Okay, that it's a Gestalt theorist, please remember. Who gave the laws of learning? That was E.L. Thorndike, which we discussed in today's session. The term, a young child responds in a new situation based on a similar past response. This is the law of analogy. Which Thorndike law underlies the introduction of a lesson? That is law of readiness. Then, which is not a Thorndike law? Exercise, proximity, effect, readiness. It is proximity. Thorndike has not discussed about law of proximity. Whose theory of learning emphasizes social interaction? If you will recall the previous sessions, it's Vygotsky. Then, Albert Bandura's theory of learning is called social learning theory. Then, learning is described as taking place in what manner? Linear or spiral? Learning is always spiral, it's not linear. So, learning does not happen in this way. Learning happens in this way. It keeps on improving through reflection and keeps going up. Then, what is the socio-constructivist view? What does the socio-constructivist view emphasize in learning? The view or the emphasize interactions in learning. Carl Rogers' learning framework is known as experiential learning. So remember, Carl Rogers, you link it with experiential learning. Now let us come to one more question. Which among the following is not a component of Thorndike's law of learning? Law of exercise, law of proximity, law of effect, or law of readiness? We just discussed the correct answer is law of proximity. We had just discussed that law of proximity. Proximity belongs to Gestalt, not Thorndike. Gestalt school or Gestalt thought. Law of proximity is a Gestalt principle of perceptual organization. It is unrelated to Thorndike's connectionism. So Thorndike's three primary laws are readiness, exercise, and effect. So, what's the distractor pattern? CTET often mixes genuine law from one theory into a list otherwise drawn from Thorndike or other theories. So this will eventually confuse you, and it's very important and necessary for one to know which theory talks about which law and which aspect. So, why children sometimes fail to learn? Let us also emphasize on why children sometimes fail to learn, and questions can be asked regarding this aspect also. Common causes of school failure. What are the different common causes of school's failure? First one is fear of failure itself. Because of the fear of failure, a child will not be able to focus, a child will not be able to concentrate. Even yesterday here at the SI, we were having a session, and in the session an example was given. Because of the amount of stress, because of the amount you can do it, you have to do it was given to the child. The child had the fear of failure. What if I could not do? The child was expected by the teacher to perform very well and become the topper. But this itself induced stress and fear of failure, and fear of failure can be a very big problem. Then fear of humiliation and disapproval. This can happen not only in examinations, in everyday classroom also. When the student has a fear that they will be humiliated for asking a doubt, not only by the teacher, but also by their peers, or the disapproval, that is when they give an answer, their answer is not approved, not accepted, or just ignored, then their participation in class decreases, and this can lead to failure. Boredom or from lack of exploration. When the class is very monotonous, teacher-centered, then students eventually end up being bored in the class. That is why you might see that if the lecture is being done by the teacher, most of the students either look outside or trying to sleep or are distracted with some other work. When learning is centered around the learners, where they are actively constructing the knowledge, then learning is much more meaningful. Ineffective or poorly matching teaching methods. When the teaching methods are not effective in the classroom. When for teaching parts of flower, rather than bringing an actual flower to the class, you are drawing a flower on the board which does not even look like a flower and teach, then of course it will not arouse interest and it will lead to ineffective learning. Confusion when home learning conflicts with classroom teaching. This is a very common happening. What they look at home is always conflicted with what they're learning. And effective examples are not taken, so confusion also arises here. So these are some common causes of school failure among children. There are a lot more other causes, but we have informed and included the common ones that have been asked in the CTET examination. Then, what can we do to prevent it? First and very most important thing is active parental involvement. If parents ever watch this video, please remember you cannot put your entire blame on teachers and walk away. You have utmost responsibility and you have to take care of the responsibility of your learners also. I'm sorry, I'm shifting the tone here, but okay, active parental involvement is very much necessary, and if questions are asked regarding the same thing, then you should know that both teachers and parents should be actively involved in the overall learning process of the child. Remember that. So if a question comes in a similar way, then you should remember that both teachers and parents should be involved in learning process. Deliberate skill development in reading, writing and social skills is necessary, and a consistent positive feedback that increases child's motivation and self-esteem. It's necessary to also appreciate the child when they are doing something very small, celebrating something that is not such big. Some people say that ये क्या कर लिया, ये तो काफी नहीं है, फर्स्ट आ जाना चाहिए था, फर्स्ट भी आ गया तो काफी नहीं है, तो स्टेट में फर्स्ट आना चाहिए था. तो ऐसे ऐसे एक्सपेक्टेशन होते हैं पेरेंट्स से या फिर टीचर्स से. सेलिब्रेट देयर स्मॉल अचीवमेंट्स, मेक देम फील मोटिवेटेड, push them but don't push them hard. Give support while pushing, which is very much necessary. Then the constructivist takeaway. Across the 14 principles and Thorndike's law that we saw today, one thread holds. Learning is active, social and built. Learning is a process that is active. Learning is a process that is social and it is built. It is never poured in. Learning can never be poured in by the teacher into the learner. Teachers create these conditions. We'll go back to the theories. Scaffolding. Teacher is a scaffolder, a facilitator, a guide. Teacher create the conditions. Children construct the understanding. So what are the key takeaways from the session of learning principles? Learning is a permanent, contextual and active process and is not only confined to classroom, it can happen outside classroom also. There are 14 principles that we have discussed today, which says that learning is constructive, goal-oriented, social and influenced by motivation, emotion and diversity. Then we have also seen Thorndike's 3 primary laws, the law of readiness, the law of exercise and the law of effect. Right? Plus 5 subordinate laws that explain connectionism and remain CTET's most tested subtopic. Please remember this. Failure in school is rarely about ability alone. It can be about fear, it can be related to boredom and mismatched teaching methods that are the usual culprits. So I hope this session has made you understand the important concepts that are related to learning principles. We'll meet in the next session. Thank you.